welcome to the Sweet Freedom Life podcast number 2. Today, for our second podcast, we're actually turning the tables a little bit. And first, I'm going to introduce you to my business partner, Kevin O'Connor, who I could not have done what I've done, what we've done as a team in Sweet Freedom without. So Kevin saw the vision of Sweet Freedom that I saw 2.5 years ago now, and got on board to actually invest in the company. And that has actually enabled Sweet Freedom to happen. So as we start our journey with Sweet Freedom and the evolution of the actual business of things, we have gone through many different phases. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, but here's the thing. I'm actually going to be in a position of vulnerability here because I'm going to let Kevin introduce me. So Kevin's a business guy. He's had his own journey with sugar and Sweet Freedom, his own epiphanies around it. And so, Kevin, I will leave it all to you. If you want to tell the folks a little bit more about yourself, feel free.
Well, I'm a middle years man, as opposed to middle-aged, and from the Middle Ages. I think I'm from the New Ages a little bit now, although I think I came from the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, perhaps. When I met Sherry it was almost 3 years ago, I was inspired by her own journey, and she told me a lot about her experience as a chef, her experience growing up, the type of food that she was fed as a child, the type of food she learned to prepare as an adult, and the type of environment in which she began to prepare food as a top chef in Australia. And then how she had an awakening and how she decided to take a deep look at where food fit in her life and how she approached food. And that led to her developing her own sort of philosophy as a food philosopher, writing a book called Return to Food. And I was inspired. And I grew up eating a lot of sugar. And I'm an athlete, and I'm an athlete that was addicted to sugar. And then I became a vegan who was addicted to sugar. And the one thing I did not give up or did not manage or did not even have an understanding of was where artificial sweeteners fit into my life. And in fact, much of my life was about artificiality, and that's what we are facing today. So today, I'm going to go right to Sherry Strong and ask her a little bit more ask her to tell us a little bit more about her story, but I'm probably going to take a little different approach because I'm going to try to ask some tough questions. So the first thing I'm going to ask you, Sherry, is when you tell people that you're on a mission to sort of change the world and have people take a real hard look at their sugar intake, what kind of experience do you have in those conversations? Do you have people looking away? Do you have people like, oh yeah, what are you facing when you have this? Because it's a very kind of a selective niche topic. What kind of things come up for you and them?
The most common response, like if I'm in a networking group, like, oh, I totally have a sugar problem, right? That's the most common response. Oh, and I quickly respond, that's because you're human. And then I get other people saying things like, oh, my husband really needs to talk to you, or my wife really needs to talk to you. They've got a major sugar problem. And then I get the other, oh, I eat really well. Like I'm automatically judging them. So yeah, or I gave up sugar. It's a much smaller percentage. And then I get some people who actually eat well, think they're eating well, and yet when you just kind of do a little excavation, you realize that they've got a lot of sugar and processed food in their diet, that either they're super fit and they're working it off like you, so they don't really, like, you're not advertising to the world that you've got a problem, right? It might show up in inflammation or other problems, but it's all hidden so they don't have to deal with it. When it comes to actually doing something about it, it's a much smaller percentage.
So do they think you're like the sugar diet lady? It's like, oh, you're gonna slap them around and tell them, oh, you've got to, oh, look at that, you had some M&Ms, and cut the M&Ms and licorice out, and cut the pop out, and away you go. And you're there to is their accountability coach. Is that sort of what you think that it's going through in their mind?
Yeah, I know a lot of people automatically kind of internalize, and it's like when you're a therapist and you go out to dinner and someone's like, don't analyze me over dinner. It'd be like saying to a lawyer, don't give me legal advice over dinner. um, you know, I don't go out. I have my own issues around food. I have my own judgments. So when I'm actually eating my food, I'm not looking over at my table partner's meal and going like that. And I remember when I was first speaking about these things, I remember this was way back in Australia when I wasn't even targeting sugar. And I'd be at a networking event and they'd have a coffee cup with a little biscuit or cookie on the side of their plate. And I can't tell you how often it would, I don't normally have, a cookie with my coffee. Or it's like, I'm not the food police. I'm not here to judge you. That's definitely not my thing at all. If anything, for most of my life, I have been a highly judgmental person. I'm a recovering judger. So I still have it within me. And I think there's probably some good and healthy sides to it, but there's definitely an unhealthy side. And so I know for me that the happier I get, it's usually in part connected to being less judgmental. So yeah, not food police at all.
So if you're not the food police, what are you?
Well, I am a philosopher around food. And I know in Australia, when I would say that, they think that's a wanky term, like highfalutin. In some crowds, they might say. So I take a philosophical approach, and I like the philosophical approach because it's not rigid, it's not judgmental. It allows for the fact that there are so many non-black and white answers. There are certain things that are black and white, like for me, chemicals in our food, growing foods chemically, removing nutrients out of our food. That's black and white to me, not a good thing. But around our behaviors, around food and the whole judgment piece and feeling good about food and having a healthy relationship with food, it's a path. And the approach it's more like this. It's not a straight highway. I think that's the thing, is that if you look in nature, there's not a lot of straight highways or paths. Humans have created them, and they've had to really push nature aside to do it. But everything's kind of meandering. You go up a hill or around a corner, all that kind of thing. And I think that's the approach that I take with food and our relationship with it, and getting over sugar, is that it is a path like this. I don't see it as a straight highway. You can do it for a certain amount of time as the straight highway, the 1 to 2 days or the week off of sugar, the month, or even the year. But if you don't actually deal with the environment around it, it's just going to grow back, right? So to me, I'd like to go with the flow of life rather than trying to create a highway and wreck nature in the process.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that sugar is sort of like the pinnacle, or a signal that will tell us a little bit about how we approach our relationship with food. So we've got this addictive substance, the sugar, but wrapped around that is like how we approach food. And that happens to be sort of the gateway, the number one pressure point. But probably when we look at sugar and, responding to cravings and feeding ourselves when we're a little discouraged, the sugar is the easiest place to go, but it's more indicative of how we approach food in general. Can you talk a little bit about, food as fuel and nutrition versus fuel as entertainment? Because sometimes I look at sugar, being a sugar addict, like if you put, and I'm an all or nothing, you put a Toblerone in front of me, I eat the whole Toblerone. Or you don't have sugar in the house. That would be my approach. Bring in something sweet and it would be gone. And I'm gluten-free and I'm vegan, or freaking friendly, but I'll find the sugar, the chocolate covered almonds, whatever. And they have to all go, they have to go, so it's like I'm on. And then once I'm fully entertained by my sugar, I feel discouraged, depressed, and lousy. And then there's no more. And so it's like, and I don't grab any more sugar. But my sense is that I mean, obviously in that case, there's nothing about that that's feeding my body. There's nothing about nourishing. It's about something else. I'd love your insights on that.
So I want to just acknowledge you for your insight into interpreting my last answer. I thought it was hugely insightful and really well said. So I just want to acknowledge that. It actually, got me here a bit.
Well, can I just say something about that, where that came from? And that comes from, as a single man, going out on dates and going out to dinner and be constantly reminded by the person I'm at dinner with. There's always a comment overshadowing the meal. I'd like to get this, but I shouldn't eat that, and I shouldn't. And there's a disconnect between that. There's already this noise in the head around the meal. And I grew up eating very simply, and I'm almost the greatest cook, so I was pretty basic. So when presented with choices and going out on social situations, I hear this, oh, that looks good. I should probably get that. This wouldn't be good for me. And I'm thinking, like, there's something in between. This tastes good and is healthy and will feed me, and I'll have a nice time, and all these other stories. So that's sort of kind of an epiphany. It was like, wow, people have some very interesting relationships with food, that it's not about fuel and nutrition and about health. It's about, there's other story going on. So thank you. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, well, we're all, our whole relationship around food is around story. Like, you have a story about, if it's there, I have to finish it, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many of us can relate to that?
Yeah.
There's millions of people who can relate to that. Yeah, so we all have tons of stories, and that's why the whole diet mentality and these approaches of don't eat this and just eat this and weigh your food and be judgmental and regimented around it, it doesn't actually work for the human species. It doesn't work and we can push through with a bit of willpower for a certain amount of time, but eventually how we do life is represented by how we do food. And the whole thing around fuel and entertainment, food's like way more than that. It's like socially binding, it's culturally grounding. There's just so many aspects. And particularly if you've used food to help heal your trauma, that weaving is so incredibly complex. And if you've done it like I did from birth, it's a really complex thing to actually unwind. I don't think I've ever I talked a little bit about how I came into the world, but I never really discussed the fact that I was third born of 4 children. But when I came along, my parents had broken up. My mom was 20 and she already had a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. You can't tell me that this newborn is welcome in your life. Now, I love my mom, and I know she loves me to her absolute maximum capacity, and it's huge. But in the same situation, I don't know whether I would have accepted a third child, into my life in those circumstances. So you can imagine how welcome I was. My dad was an angry man, emotionally not developed, when he was a father of young children. And so that was a really tough environment, and a baby feels all of that. A baby feels all of that. So when I started out on formula, sugar was like, it really was a lifesaver for me. So you kind of build on that from a childhood, and then you go through puberty, and I was food, home economics, really, sugar addict, big sugar addict at 14. In fact, I have memories of driving and kind of having problems with my vision. So I was already experiencing pre-diabetic symptoms, around my vision. And I knew it was connected to sugar, but I didn't want to admit it. So yeah, food is fuel. And as primal beings, that's what we used it for. There wasn't a lot of, sitting around emotionally eating blueberries in the field when you're at the threat of other animals, harming you, or even other people who want that food. So we weren't indulged in emotional eating until we actually started to develop, complex agricultural systems and process food. So then you kind of, you take the inheritance of what you learn, your relationship with food, and whether your parents cooked at home, whether it was all processed food, whether you used it for emotional reasons, whether food was used as a tool against you. A lot of children are punished or rewarded with food. And there's some really seriously kind of, mind messing up games that parents can actually play with their children. And that messes with people long term. So your relationship to food is, yes, about nourishment. Yes, it's about fuel, but it's also about this cultural piece that's beautiful, this social piece that's beautiful. The breaking of bread, is a phrase that is woven into almost every culture. And then if you have, that's, if everything's healthy, you have a lot of story, and that's good, and it feeds you. But there's so many people who have so many unhealthy stories and relationships with food that it becomes a very complex thing to dissect. And that's why it's Sweet Freedom. I never wanted it to be just an 8-week program. I wanted it to be something that people were doing for life as part of a community, because I know you're not going to solve every single food problem you have in 8 weeks. There's just so much to actually learn about it, that we want to create a community where it's safe to learn about these things, and safe to talk about these things, and safe to make mistakes around it, because I don't think it's a straight path for many.
As I hear you speak, it strikes me that this is a pretty tough row to hoe, because what you're talking about is having conversations with people that are difficult, because it's about relationship, and whether it's a relationship with a person or relationship with something in your environment, people would prefer not to talk about relationship and connections and engagement. They would rather follow prescriptive suggestion and then rely on the science or on the directions of another. And I can see that, if just as you're thinking about that, you're talking about that, I was thinking, wow, nobody talks in the diet industry about your relationship with food, about when you eat, who you eat with, how the food is prepared, where you source the food, and how all of that stuff, all of those activities can sort of lay in on you a healthy template for nutrition, or they can be in competition with making healthy choices. And so, one of the things that appealed to me when I met you was your expansive, sort of holistic, comprehensive approach to this. It's also one of the things that makes Sweet Freedom unique in the marketplace, and it also makes it difficult to market this distinct service in a sense, because we're really talking about engaging in dialogue about our relationship with food, and we're using sugar as the sort of the flashpoint, because it's the most addictive substance, and our food is being manipulated by it to prey upon these things that we do that they're not so healthy. So, I mean, that's really helpful to me. Why do you think the diet industry doesn't talk about food relationships? Why is none of this, like when you're going out and you're going to follow the paleo, or you're going to do a keto diet or something, why is it, so prescriptive and so, laid out, and do this and you will lose weight? And like, is it just because like that sells, or is it because it's like, you don't have to do anything different? Like, why do you think there's none of this stuff?
There's many reasons, Kevin. There's like, one, it's easier to sell. Do this, don't do that. It's very, very simple. If you just do this, this will happen. The other thing is that because diets don't work, it has a 95% failure rate. You can always go back to another diet. So the diet industry, and here's the thing around the diet piece, is when a diet fails, no one blames the diet, they blame themselves. Like, you kind of go, oh, maybe that wasn't a good diet, but I let myself down, or I just didn't have the willpower, I didn't have the strength to do it. So number one, it's much easier to sell. And from our conversations we've had.
Can I stop you there? That's a huge revelation, that the diet it's disconnected from the person that's following the diet. So here's the manual, here's what you do, and if you don't do what we say you're doing, that's your problem. It's not the diet's problem.
Yeah.
And I think if you have a food problem or a relationship with food where you eat for comfort or you eat to make yourself feel good, sounds to me like a recipe. As soon as you slip, then it's like, oh, yeah, here I go again. And while I think about that, let me get a bag of Frito-Lays or Doritos. And I mean, I know when I eat for comfort, and I know it's not as big of an issue for me, but it's certainly part of my framework. So it's kind of like the diet industry operates in isolation from human nature, or at least or preys upon human nature. I mean, it'd be kind of sinister to think that they hope you fail, so you buy another diet. I mean, that would be rather sinister. But at
No.
least they don't want you to accept that the diet didn't work. It's not the diet that didn't work.
Yeah, well, the whole caloric restriction thing, calories in, calories out, the simple math, we know doesn't work. It's much more complex than that. I mean, and I don't think it's just like, let's come up with a diet we know is going to fail, so they'll buy another diet. I don't think it's that simple, but I think it's because to actually figure out what does work is so complex. Like, I've been working on this for 30 years, easily. Working on my relationship with food for easily 30 years, but started studying nutrition at 14. And not just superficially studying what the teacher gave me. I used to do extra assignments on my own. I started to understand the politics of food at the age of 14 when I wrote a paper on cholesterol that I gave to my home ec teacher. And she's like, what's this? I didn't ask for this. I was like, I just wanted to do an extra assignment. Annoying child. So it's not that they, I think that they're trying to be evil. But it's like, if you do this, this will happen. And certain people will do it for a certain time. And that's why the whole thing around success stories and weight loss, I'm really reticent to exploit. If people want to do their own before and afters, that's great. And we've highlighted, in particular, Christina, who's done this. But for me, I know that the before and after, or the success stories, can be temporary. And that what happens is that people will lose the weight. We've seen it with The Biggest Loser. We've seen it in all kinds of things. And I've even seen it in Sweet Freedom, is that people have before and after stories and they're very excited. But if they don't continue to engage, they don't continue to do the work, that becomes a temporary story. And that happens with every single diet. And so what happens now is you have people who've submitted their after pictures, and then they relapse because they're not doing the work, and they get shamed by themselves, usually embarrassed by themselves, and then they don't show up to do more work. And so, with Sweet Freedom, the before and after pictures are really, they're internal things. I had something come up today, and I would love to share it, because for me it was pretty beautiful, and it really epitomizes. So Farah, who's one of our Sweet Freedom new people going through the program, she said, before trying Sweet Freedom, I was always hearing, try this diet or drink the mixture of so-and-so for 20 days and you will get flat abs. To me, it looked like putting a bandage on my head because I have a headache. Since I've joined Sweet Freedom, I've started to know myself better, and I'm throwing all bandages of behavior out the window. So a lot of these things are like treating wounds, deeper wounds or emotional wounds, with a bandage. And you can kind of get the illusion, you get a bit of attention from the bandage, right? Oh, you're all right. That kind of, oh, you look great. You lost weight. That's awesome, right? But you haven't done the inner healing work that actually shows up in your behaviors around food. So, and that is a process. It doesn't happen overnight. We say 8 weeks to change your relationship with food. It's 8 weeks to develop the foundational skills for a lifetime of actually developing a healthier relationship with food, our body, and the planet.
So you're really not about diet at all.
No, that's my book, Return to Food, was the secrets of the anti-diet.
You're all about relationship, developing a healthy relationship with food, and then understanding where an addictive substance like sugar fits into that relationship, and being able to so your before and after pictures are pictures of people's heart and soul, and we just don't have that technology yet. We can't do one of those things. That's a brave place to be. Can you tell me about how you deal with that in an 8-week program where you're the master coach, where you coach people through that, because I know that it's a program that is downloadable and it's guided, and but the power must be in the community and in having a coach, because I mean, I have a coach for my business, and people. So where does that fit in? Because that's different than just getting a diet and following it and cooking meals every day and avoiding this and cleaning your cupboards out. So can you talk a little bit about your approach in that coaching?
Yeah, so and that came from many years of working with people. So I started out with a don't eat this, eat this model. And I saw people have kind of this measure of success, and they would always relapse, always. And then I started out getting them into the kitchen. Okay, so combining don't eat this with also having the skills of knowing how to prepare food, but also the understanding of how real food gets prepared, where it comes from, all that kind of piece. And then I saw them have more measure of success. And then what happened was I started to develop the philosophies, because people were confused. Oh, my doctor said this, my nurse said this, the scientist said this was on the news. And they were so confused. So that's when I went on the path to develop these philosophies that help people relate to food, their body, and the planet in a much more natural way. So they're not at the whims of the latest scientific information that's pushing and selling a product. So once people combined don't eat this with the getting into the kitchen and the philosophical approach to understanding how they're meant to be eating, you see it's going into different layers of their being. So they would have this level of success versus this or this. But it wasn't until I started working with the hypernourishment piece, which is the understanding that we're a holistic, complex being, and that the physical food, how we actually do one area of life is how we do other areas of life, and that this is just one area, and that it is impacted by how we actually do our life mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The physical is the manifestation of how we do those other things. So as I started to help myself detox mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, as well as the physical, making those changes and sustaining the changes around, sugar addiction and food addiction became easier. It became less of walking a tight wire, because what I found, this was my experience, modeled and mirrored by many other people, you lose the weight, but then you're shit scared that you're gonna somehow eat something, it's gonna trigger you, you're gonna start binging, and you're gonna lose all that effort, because getting to that point was like walking a tight wire, and walking back is too scary, right? So I wanted to actually create something that wasn't scary for people. So number one, take the attention off of the weight. The weight will come. Your ideal weight will come, and your healthy weight will come as you adopt and really get rooted in your healthy behaviors. But it was so important to start to learn how to detox that mental, emotional, and spiritual side. And when I started to do it with myself, I made longer lasting, sustainable changes, and I had a much more relaxed relationship around food. And then when I started with other people and saw, okay, where are you not nourishing yourself mentally? Where are you not nourishing yourself emotionally? Where are you not spiritually? Where are you toxic in those areas? And we work together to eliminate and nourish in all of those areas. The whole picture starts to come together, and you start to have this very grounded approach to food, not a one-dimensional approach.
So, and correct me, Myra, it sounds to me like we're really talking about personal transformation, and we're using food in our relationship to which is, and it really, food is a way of having a relationship with the planet, because the planet, sustains us. So this planetary relationship via food being a conduit to us. And as we develop a healthy relationship and understand where food comes from, understand what foods are good for our body, understand how good food is prepared, that we will have an awareness of goodness in our life that could be much greater and much more impactful than simply a before and after picture of losing weight. So you've got a bold mission, which is to ultimately change, give people tools to change to transform themselves. And we're using food, and we're starting with something that's epidemic, something that started out as food that's been manipulated chemically, to prey on people's biological and emotional tendencies to approach addiction, and and you're sort of kind of unwrapping that, making that more, there's more awareness, but also you're giving them strategies that will cross over from just food preparation to probably relationships. I mean, they will see things differently.
They do.
And I suspect that's some of the feedback you're getting. That's a new space to have a program that on surface looks like it's about reducing sugar intake. So that's great. So next time we get to talk about some things that people's individual experiences, because I'm sure that there's something more than just, hey, I don't eat much sugar anymore. There's a much bigger story.
Yeah. And here's what I tell people. So I just want to also quickly say that we do deal with the food piece.
Yeah.
I'll call it the world's most holistic sugar cessation program, because we've got the whole food piece. In fact, there are programs out there that would charge $150 for just the food piece that we're offering, like just that. So the other thing, the distinction I want to make around the relationship with food is that when people come into the program, I say, about 4 weeks in, I said, you thought this was a food program. You didn't realize this was a program all about self-love, because that's the core of it. And if you think about it in concentric circles, here's us, right? Here's our body, here's food, and here's our planet. It's all related, right? So we start from the inside, from us, that core. We learn to listen to our body. That helps us. We're still kinesthetic mammals. Just like other mammals can actually sniff and tell if something's organic or conventional, we still actually have that capability within us. It's just being lost because we've abdicated that survival tool for most of our life. And some of us, in some of our cases, people have never consciously used that tool. So we start to learn to listen to our body, and distinguishing the messages of addictive messages with nourishing messages. So I remember years ago when I was doing this work, a woman came up to me after one of my presentations. She said, I listened to my body and I knew this morning that I needed sugar. And so I had a Coke and a Snickers bar for breakfast. And she was dead serious. She wasn't joking at all. She was like, I was like, okay, we need to make a distinction between addictive messages and nourishing messages. And what you got was an addictive message. Yeah, so it
and
is.
Those messages tend to be very loud. And so I guess part of the challenge is it's the difference between classical music and, some heavy duty punk rock. I mean, if at one moment in time, you could be, it's like something can overwhelm another thing. And I guess part of that is being able to understand this is an overwhelming response. This is a craving, and how to manage those cravings so you can sit and look at your options without feeling like you're not in control.
Yeah. And that's why we have all kinds of non-food tools to help people do those things. Because it's, and when you've developed these deep neural pathways of behavior, I'm just kind of going down this track. When I do this, I eat this, or, when I feel this, I eat this, I reach here, I go to that cupboard, I go to the freezer, I go to that spot. Or in my case, when I was in full-on addiction, I had stuff everywhere. I always had a bunch of things in my handbag. I had something in my nightstand drawer, I had something in a cupboard, and there was always something in the fridge and the freezer, and, my desk. Like, it was everywhere. So like a true addict, I could go everywhere. And I had to redevelop new neural pathways. And I remember a few years ago feeling this great sense of pride in that, oh, I don't have sugar in my bag anymore. Unless I'm transporting, one of my favorite chocolate bars from the store to my home, sugar doesn't actually live in my handbag. And for me, that's a sign, it's an indicator of growth.
You know what I would like to talk about next time? You just raised something that some people might go like, what do you mean she has a chocolate bar in her bag and she eats chocolate bar? Mm-hmm. I'd love to talk more next time about, well, if I'm managing my cravings, but I don't want to give up my tastes, the things that how do I do that and still make nourishing, healthy decisions? Like, for example, you obviously like chocolate. That's not a Cadbury milk chocolate bar that you're buying.
Yeah.
I might have. I can think of my favorite ones and my Hershey bars. I mean, I don't eat those anymore. But for me, I chose not to eat chocolate because it was just my best way of managing it. But for someone like yourself who is just a foodie, you love good food, you haven't given up sweetness in your life.
Yeah. Well, I
You've
often
given
say,
something.
chocolate is God's way of saying he loves us and wants us to be happy. And I'd rather live to 100 with chocolate than 120 without it.
Good.
So yeah, there is a way. There's a certain percentage of people who can't. It's all or nothing. They have one
Mhm.
little bit. They're just all gangbusters and they can't stop. And that's about 5% of the population. But for 95% of us, it can be managed. And
Mhm.
it's a way of actually finding a way of managing it. And that's what we show people is that sweet freedom is not sweet non-existence. It's not like no more sweets. It's about having freedom to actually choose the path that you wish to choose, to have your relationship with food in a way that actually works for who you are and how you do life and what it is you want to do in the world. It's not about this zero tolerance, judgmental, if you have a bit of sugar, you're bad or anything like that. It's a it's truly designed to liberate you from food dogma, from dieting, hangovers. And so you can actually, and I say it many times, develop this healthy relationship with food, your body, and the planet.
Well, thank you. Next time we get to talk about all the goodies that we get to eat that don't conflict with the message of that excess sugar is bad. So there's a happy place. I'm looking forward to going there. So we'll talk next time about that happy place.
Awesome. And again, I just want to say thanks for stepping into this space, Kevin, and just acknowledging you publicly, because you don't get the public kudos. That Sweet Freedom couldn't have happened without you. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Receive. I receive.
Okay, good.
Till next time.
Take care.